Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to continue talking about fractions and decimals and the relationship between them. We're going to learn a little bit more about how to change from decimal to fraction or fraction to decimal. So I put up here just a place value chart to look at, just to remind us that over here we have pieces of a number, tenths, hundredths, okay? Over here, we have the whole numbers, starting with the ones column. So on the right of the decimal point right here, we know they're parts of a number, okay? Let's look at this right here. So if it says change each decimal to a fraction in simplest form, we'll worry about the simplest form part after. Let's start with this. So if I'm changing this decimal here, this says 0.8, or the first thing I'm going to do is try to pronounce it without saying point. So I can also call this 8, and it's in, I know, the tenths column, so 8 tenths. And then think to yourself, what does that look like as a fraction, right? And that just looks like 8 over 10. And we can simplify that by dividing both of these by the greatest common factor, which is 2. And 8 becomes 4, and 10 becomes 5. So 4/5 is the same as 8 tenths in simplest form. Here, 0.5 is also pronounced 5 tenths, okay? That's written as 5 over 10, which simplifies to 1/2. Okay. Over here we have 45 hundredths. Okay. I know that because I pronounced this just the way I would as if there was no decimal point here. So I would say 45, and then it ends in this place, which is the hundredths place. So this can be written as 45 over 100. Okay. I can simplify that by dividing the top and bottom by the greatest common factor, which is 5. And if I do that, if I divide 45 by 5, I get 9. And 100 by 5, I get 20. So 9/20 is its simplest form. Our next one, 25 hundredths, just like it sounds, is written as 25 over 100. Divide both by the greatest common factor, which is 25. 25 becomes 1, and 100 becomes 4. So 25 hundredths is the same as 1/4. Okay. Now let's try that the other direction. So now we're going to go from fractions to decimals. So 4 tenths, let's think about what that would look like. Well, we have no whole numbers, we can see, so I can put my 0 there. And now the first place here is the tenths. So I'm going to write 0.4, and think to yourself, that is pronounced 4 tenths, just like this. Okay. Let's try this one here. 8 tenths. Again, nothing in the holes, so that's my 0. And then I'm going to put 8 in the tenths spot. 32 hundredths. Okay. Again, nothing in the holes. Okay, and I'm going to just write 32 and make sure it's ending in the hundredths, right? 32 tenths hundredths, okay? And that's how you're going to write that 0.32. And 12 hundredths here is going to be 0.12, ending in the hundredths place. Now this one's tricky, 6 hundredths, right? Sometimes people want to write 0.6, but if I put the 6 here, right? Well, that's going to say 6 tenths because it's ending up in the tenths spot. So what I have to do, okay, is I have to push it over towards the hundredths spot. How am I going to do that? By using a place value 0. So 0.06, and now I have 6 in the hundredths spot. Same thing over here, okay? 4 hundredths is going to be 0.04 with the 4 in the hundredths place. Okay, now let's try down here. What about fractions greater? Okay, fractions greater than 1 whole. How's that going to look when we turn that into a decimal? Well, just like up before we said there were no holes, well now we're talking about mixed numbers, so there are holes. So you start with the mixed numbers whole number here, 3, and I'm going to write that over here. Then I add my decimal, right? Because the whole numbers go on the left side of the decimal. So it's 3 wholes, and, because the decimal is pronounced as end, so 3 and 5 tenths would say 3 and 5 tenths, or 3.5. Okay? How about here? 7 and 2/10. Well, 7 is in the whole number place. And then I need the 2/10. So 7 and 2/10. Over here, we have 1 in the whole number place. Once you have your whole number in, you can add that decimal in because that's the only thing that's going to go on the left side of the decimal is the whole number. Now you need 400ths. Well, if you put the 4 here, it's going to say 1 and 4/10. I need it to push over to the hundredths spot, and I'm going to do that by using a 0. So 1.04 is 1 and 400ths. And here I have 25 wholes, and I have 4/10, which is 25.4. Okay. Now let's look at the other direction. So decimals greater than 1, changing them to fractions and mixed numbers, right? So if we're looking here, 5.3 is pronounced 5 and 3/10. Think about what that would look like as a mixed number, right? 5 and 3/10. Okay. 6 and 8/10. Okay, would be 6 and 8/10. Now they didn't say I had to put it into simplest form, but I could. If I simplify 8/10, it's going to become 6 and 4/5. Okay, 4 and 7/100. 4 and 7/100. Okay. And here we have 7 wholes and 5/100ths, because I can see that the 5 is in the hundredths place. Okay. 5/100ths we can also simplify so that it becomes 7, and we can divide both these by 5, so that becomes 1, and 100 divided by 5 becomes 20. So that is it in simplest form. And that brings us to our next part, right? You probably noticed, right, that we know that all fractions can be changed into decimals, but all the fractions we were looking at had denominators of 10 or 100, right? So they sounded just like decimals, tenths and hundredths. So the question is, what if the denominator is not 10 or 100, right? What do you do? So one way we can do this, right, is by finding an equivalent fraction, okay, with a denominator of a tenth or a hundredth. So we'll start with this one here, 2/5. Okay, there's no fifths place in decimals, but there is a tenths place. And I know that if I make the denominator 10, I can create an equivalent fraction, right, by timesing both the top and bottom by 2. And I now can see that 2/5 is the same as 4/10. Okay, and now listen to the way that sounds. 4/10. What is that going to look like? 0.4. Let's try that over here. 1/25. Well, I can't turn 25ths into tenths, but I can turn them into hundredths. And I do that by multiplying 25 by 4. And if I do that to the bottom, I must do that to the top. So I get 4/100ths or 400ths. Think about what that sounds like. Still, I have no holes, so I always put the 0 there. And if I put the 4 here, it's going to say 4/10. So 0.04. And here I have 3/4. Okay. I can't change that into tenths. I can change it into hundredths. So 4 fits into 100 25 times. So I multiply the top also by 25, and I get 75/100ths. Okay. Now remember that it has to end in the hundredths place. So here you're fine just putting 0.75 because it pushes it out to the hundredths place already. 40/50ths, well, I could actually do either, but I'm going to turn it into hundredths because that's pretty easy. And I'm going to say 50 fits into 100 2 times. I have to do the top, the same thing to the top. So I get 80/100ths, okay? And that's going to give me 0.80, okay? 1/2, I'll turn into tenths, okay? That gives me times 5 times 5, 5/10 or 0.5. And down here, 4/5 I'll change into tenths, times 2 times 2. And that gives me 8/10 or 0.8. Okay, so today you're going to do some work in your workbook where you're going to be moving between fractions and decimals, okay, and making sure also to pay attention if it asks you to put in simplest form that you're simplifying those fractions at the end. Okay, have a great day.